The cold on Thrillix was not the kind that simply bit. It pierced. It crept through the seams of insulated gloves and tore into bones with a malice that seemed almost sentient. The wind screamed like a wounded beast across the barren white plains, carving spirals into drifts already 2 meters high. Most species avoided this part of the planet entirely, especially during the 6-month-long polar vortex. But Dr. Harlan Frost wasn't most people. His crawler, an aging medical rover affectionately named the Mercy Warden, hummed through the gale with determined protest. Every few minutes he'd glance at the console, watching the flickering signal, an old, weak emergency beacon, pulse from a point deep in the dead zone. No clear coordinates, just an intermittent SOS coded in an outdated dialect. His gut told him what his brain refused to admit. Someone was dying out there. The radio sputtered with static as he tried once more to call out. "This is Dr. Frost, planetary field medic under Alliance emergency jurisdiction. If you can hear me, activate a heat flare. I repeat, activate a flicker." Barely visible through the sleet, but there. An orange shimmer arcing into the sky, wobbling, dying, but real. He gritted his teeth and turned the crawler toward it, throttling the treads harder than was wise in the ice. As the vehicle crested a shallow ridge, he saw the wreckage. A small, half-buried dome shelter. Walls cracked and half-collapsed under the weight of accumulated snow. The flare had burned out, its emitter sparking as it rolled down a hillock. The beacon light blinked feebly near the entrance, like the heartbeat of a fading star. Harlan jumped from the crawler, wind hammering him the instant he opened the hatch. The cold slammed into his faceplate, bogging the interior in seconds. But he didn't hesitate. He trudged through waist-deep snow, hauling his emergency med kit, every step a battle against the wind. He reached the shelter, pried open the frozen door, and stepped inside. The warmth hit him like a phantom, barely present, but enough to preserve life a little longer. Inside he found a shape huddled against the far wall. A woman, alien, her skin pale violet and marbled with frostbite, wrapped around 2 tiny forms that didn't stir at his entry. Her legs were pinned beneath a collapsed beam. She hadn't moved in hours. She lifted her head weakly when he approached, eyes wide with exhaustion and disbelief. The children, he could see now, were breathing but barely. Both of them were no older than 5 standard years, curled against her like fragile seedlings. Her voice cracked when she tried to speak. "Are you real?" He knelt beside her, scanning her vitals with a trembling hand. "I'm as real as you need me to be. I'm getting you out of here." Her grip, weak but desperate, clutched his coat. "Don't leave us." "I'm not going anywhere," he said, already prepping sedatives and stabilizers. "Not without all 3 of you." And for the first time, she wept. Not from fear, but from the fragile, terrifying hope that maybe, just maybe, someone had come for them after all. Harlan worked in silence, the focused silence of a man used to threading needles in disaster zones. He injected the 2 children first, small doses of warmers and immune boosters, enough to keep them stable for transport. Their tiny chests moved with shallow, ragged rhythm, but they responded. Good. That was something. Then he turned his attention to the mother. Her skin was slick with cold sweat, her face tight with pain, but she refused to cry out. Even as he examined her injuries, compound fractures in both femurs, dislocation of the pelvic cradle, signs of internal bruising, she gritted her teeth and watched him with sharp, intelligent eyes. "Name?" he asked gently. "Elira," she rasped. He nodded. "Elira, I need to lift this beam off your legs. It's going to hurt, a lot, but I've got stabilizers and synthetic marrow splints ready. I just need you to stay with me." She stared at him for a long moment. "Are they, my children? Are they still alive?" "Yes." The words seemed to give her the strength of 10 warriors. She reached down, touched their sleeping heads. Then she looked at him and gave a single nod. Harlan worked quickly. He used a portable gravity jack to lift the fallen beam, shifting it just enough to free her legs. She screamed, a raw, wounded sound that echoed off the metal walls like a banshee's wail. But she didn't pass out. He injected her immediately, both painkillers and nanite flushes to prevent shock. He wrapped her in thermal blankets and secured her onto the hover stretcher, then carefully laid the children beside her. As he pushed them back through the snow toward the crawler, his muscles burned with every motion. But he never once slowed. He could feel the frost trying to sink into his own body, but he ignored it. He was trained for this. More importantly, someone needed him. The Mercy Warden's heat sensors hissed as he loaded them in. Once the cabin sealed and warm air blasted over the stretchers, the silence became unbearable. Only the beeping of the monitors filled the room. She spoke again, softer now. I thought no one would come. I prayed, not to a god, just to the storm, that it would pass over us instead of through us. You're safe now, he said, gently adjusting her headrest. I've got you. Elira stared at him, something breaking behind her eyes. Don't go, she whispered. Please, don't leave us, not after this. Harlan met her gaze. I won't. And for the first time since landing on Thrillix, he realized he meant it. Not because it was his job, but because this woman and her children were no longer strangers, lost in a snowstorm. They were already something more. Inside the warmth of the medical outpost, it was easy to forget that a storm had nearly claimed 3 lives. The walls, thick with radiation-shielded alloy and snow-insulated composites, dulled the howling wind outside to a soft, distant moan. For Harlan, it was the sound of survival, a sound he'd come to welcome. Elira and her children had been stabilized, their vitals now monitored by the outpost's AI, a semi-sentient unit named Dax, who handled most of the non-invasive diagnostics. The children, Talon and Mira, slept side by side under a heated blanket, their small hands tangled together. Elira rested in the adjacent room, her legs suspended in med-gel braces, wrapped in slow-working tissue stimulants and nanite bone fusion systems. Harlan moved between them quietly, like a man walking through a sacred place. Every hour, he checked their vitals, adjusted nutrient drips, reprogrammed the thermal cycles to keep their bodies from reacting to the cold they had narrowly escaped. It wasn't heroism that kept him moving, it was habit. But this time, there was something else. He couldn't stop seeing Elira's eyes when she'd whispered that plea in the crawler. Don't go. It wasn't the desperation of a patient. It was the cry of someone who had been abandoned too many times. And somehow, in that moment, it had pierced through all his clinical detachment. It had made her real, not just a case, not just another statistic. Real, fragile and fierce, alive but hanging by a thread. It wasn't professional, he knew that, but it was human. 3 days passed. Elira didn't speak much. She watched him when he entered, her eyes following his movements as if she were cataloging him. Not with suspicion, at least not entirely, but with the wary attentiveness of a survivor waiting for the next blow. It wasn't until the 4th morning that she finally asked the question she'd been holding back. Why did you come for us? Harlan, kneeling beside the child's cot, glanced over his shoulder. You activated a beacon. She shook her head slightly. That beacon's been transmitting for 3 years. No one came until you. He straightened, rubbed the back of his neck. I was doing a resupply run. Storm shifted. I saw the signal spike. He paused. I didn't know what I'd find. Elira studied him for a moment, then looked away. My husband, he was a scout for the Vexeri Frontier Corps. Died 2 years into the war. They called him a hero, then left us to rot. Her voice didn't tremble. We weren't important anymore. I'm sorry, Harlan said quietly. Don't be. You didn't do it. She turned her gaze toward the viewport, where snow still drifted like ash. But you did something no one else did. He didn't answer. That night when she slept, she dreamed not of storms but of silence. For the first time in years, it didn't terrify her. And for the first time since landing on Thrillix, Harlan didn't feel alone. The recovery was slow, but it was steady. Talon began speaking again first, usually in short, curious questions aimed at Dax, who always replied with patient humor. Mira was quieter, more introspective, never straying far from her mother's bed. Elira, though still bound to her stabilizers, regained her strength with each passing day. By the end of the 2nd week, she had begun using the mobile harness Harlan built for her. A sling-braced exoframe that allowed her upper body full range of motion while her legs remained suspended. She hated it, but she used it. Her pride, while injured, was still intact. One evening, as the children drew strange spirals on the frosted window panels, Elira watched Harlan prep rations in the galley. There was a strange domesticity to the moment, one she hadn't tasted since before the war. A warmth that wasn't artificial, something like family, but not quite, not yet. Harlan, she said from across the room. He looked up. I've been thinking about what happens next. He set down the ration tray. You mean when your legs are healed? I mean when I'm able to leave. Her voice was soft but edged with something heavier. Do you want us to? Harlan didn't speak immediately. He moved toward her, leaned against the wall beside her hover seat. I didn't save you so I could keep you here. I know. She hesitated, but I need to ask. He looked at her then, really looked at her. The way her face held lines of exhaustion and stubborn strength, the way her hand curled instinctively around Mira's tiny fingers even while she was thinking of the future. I want you to stay, he said. Her breath caught. I want all three of you to stay. Not out of pity. Not because you owe me anything, but because this place, this life I built alone, it was never meant to stay that way. He paused, voice low, and because I haven't felt this alive in a very long time. Alira's eyes filled, but she blinked the tears away. Her hand reached for his, tentative but firm, and she whispered something he hadn't expected. Would you marry me? Harlan's heart stopped for just a second. She wasn't teasing. Her expression was raw, vulnerable, but proud. She wasn't begging. She was offering. An alliance, a partnership, a life. I want you to be their father, she said, if you'll have us. He didn't answer with words. He just leaned forward, touched his forehead to hers, and held her hand tighter. Outside, the snow had finally stopped, and the stars began to peek through. The stillness of morning in the outpost was unlike any quiet Harlan had ever known. It wasn't the silence of loneliness, nor the sterile hush of empty halls. This silence carried breath and warmth, children stirring in soft blankets, a woman in recovery lying in the cot where life had been restored. It was the silence of new beginnings, gently taking root. Harlan stood at the kitchen counter, staring into a cup of reheated synth brew that had long gone cold. He hadn't slept, not because of the work. He'd had harder cases with less sleep and worse equipment, but because of what she'd asked. Not demanded, not pleaded, asked. Would you marry me? The words hadn't stopped echoing in his head. He had saved many lives in his time, torn men from the jaws of death, stitched up broken soldiers, rebirthed collapsed lungs with nothing but grit and grit tape. But no one had ever looked at him the way Alira had in that moment. Like he wasn't just a medic. Like he was the difference between the end of a chapter and the start of something worth living. When he turned, she was there. In the chair he had built for her, hovering just a few centimeters off the floor. She moved with practiced grace now, no longer afraid of tipping or trembling. Her spine brace hummed softly beneath the thermal layers she wore. Mira followed silently at her side, clutching a stuffed synth pelt creature that Harlan had assembled from spare insulation. He opened his mouth to speak, but Alira raised her hand first. It trembled slightly, and her voice was lower than usual, as if she too hadn't slept. If it was too much, what I said, I'll understand. You've done more than we had any right to expect. If you tell us you can't or don't want to, I won't hold it against you. Mira watched him with wide, unreadable eyes, and Harlan realized with sudden clarity that this wasn't a conversation about romance. This was about safety. About the kind of belonging that kept people breathing when they were too tired to try anymore. Alira wasn't just asking for herself, she was asking for her children. For a chance at a family. For permanence. He crossed the room and knelt in front of them both, the stiffness in his joints forgotten as he took Alira's hand in his. I want to, he said quietly. I didn't say anything last night because I was afraid I'd say the wrong words, because I've never done this before, not this kind of healing. She blinked rapidly, a breath hitching in her throat. But I've watched you survive what should have killed you. I've seen how you protect those two like your heart is wrapped around them, and I've seen what I become when I'm around you. She looked down at him, eyes brimming, lips trembling but firm. Harlan squeezed her hand gently. Yes, Alira, I'll marry you, and I'll be their father, if that's still what you want. It wasn't dramatic. There was no applause, no music, no tearful declarations shouted into the heavens. It was just them, in a room still tinged with the scent of frost and medicine, holding on to each other as something irreversible settled between their hearts. Mira climbed into his lap. She didn't speak, didn't smile. She just leaned her head into his chest and closed her eyes. And that was enough. Later, Alira whispered while the children slept nearby. You're brave. He shook his head. I've never been more terrified in my life. And yet, he meant it, every word. Preparations for the wedding were humble, more practical necessity than celebration, but every moment carried meaning. There was no registry, no planetary ordainment, no ancient religious rite. Just a man and a woman, 2 children, and a promise to turn survival into living. Harlan found an old solar beacon in the outpost storage unit. He reprogrammed its transmission frequency to broadcast a single short phrase, one the few satellites overhead might still catch. "Witness us." It was enough. He didn't need an audience. Just a moment recorded by the stars. Alira chose the outpost's central chamber for the ceremony. It had the best view of the valley, where now patches of green peeked between melting snowbanks. The place where she had once lain unconscious on the floor had been cleaned, warmed, reclaimed. In a way, this room had already seen their beginning. Dax, the outpost's AI, volunteered with sarcastic cheer to officiate. It projected a static flicker of golden light, shaped vaguely into a humanoid silhouette with a formal-sounding voice. "As your registered medical companion and overseer of patient psychological welfare, I will now pronounce you not dead and mutually attached." Alira wore a shawl made from her old clothes, repurposed into something beautiful by Mira and Talon's careful hands. Her spine brace was newly engraved. Harlan had burned a single word into it by hand. Home. He wore his usual medic's coat, scrubbed clean for once, and over it, the insignia patch of the Alliance Medical Corps turned backward, a symbol that his path had changed. When they stood facing each other, Alira's eyes never wavered. She didn't cry. She didn't tremble. She simply said, "From now until the stars burn cold, you will never be alone again." He answered with words he'd written not with ink, but with months of tenderness, hard-won trust, and healing. "Where you stand, I'll stand. Where you fall, I'll lift you. Where you heal, I'll wait beside you." Dax let out a fake celebratory chime and promptly declared them legally partnered under Remote Outpost Standard 17-9C, assuming neither of you perish in the next 30 seconds. The children clapped. Mira hugged her mother, and Talon took Harlan's hand like it had always belonged there. The fire that burned in the hearth that night wasn't just to fight the cold. It was a symbol, a declaration against everything that had once tried to extinguish them. Later, as they lay together beneath a sky cleared of clouds, Alira rested her head on his chest and listened to his heartbeat. She spoke so softly he almost missed it. "Thank you for saying yes." He kissed her hair, the snow-melted strands still smelling faintly of smoke and lavender. "You didn't leave me a choice," he whispered. "You gave me everything I never knew I wanted." They fell asleep like that, a woman once shattered and a man once alone, wrapped together in the warmth of something too deep for words, too sacred for explanation. They weren't surviving anymore. They were a family. 3 months after the storm, the snow was no longer a threat, but a memory clinging to the edges of thawing valleys. Green broke through the gray, timid shoots rising along the slopes, like whispers of a future too bold to speak aloud. But even in the warming air, old ghosts stirred. Harlan had grown used to waking to the soft pressure of Alira's hand resting on his chest. Every morning, her fingers would move instinctively, tracing the seams of his collarbone or curling into his shirt like an anchor holding her to this life. Her legs had regained some movement, just enough to shuffle from the bed to her stabilizer, but he still carried her sometimes. Not because she couldn't move, but because she let him. That small permission was a deeper kind of intimacy than words ever could be. The children flourished in the new rhythm of home. Talon spent hours shadowing Harlan in the medbay, mimicking procedures with alarming accuracy. Mira had discovered the music functions embedded in the station's AI and composed strange melodies that echoed through the halls at dusk, always just off-key but full of heart. But peace, as it often does, drew predators. It began with a transmission, garbled and faint, cut through by static but unmistakably laced with a Virexian military tag. Alira recognized the tone before the language. Her spine stiffened as she listened, her hand tightening around the edge of the table. It was a patrol, scouting, not far. Their sector would be pinged within 48 hours. Harlan watched her face as she processed it. He knew what it meant without needing her to say it. Her past was clawing its way toward them. "They're not looking for you," he said. "They're just mapping the zone." "That's how it always starts," she replied, voice cold. "A ripple, a probe, then the boots follow." What would they do if they found you? Her silence answered for her. She stood slowly, shifting her weight into her stabilizer, and walked to the viewport. Outside, the sky was turning orange with the burn of the planet's third sun rising through the haze. There are people who would trade my name for credits, she said. Some would do it for ideology, others just for the sport of it. You're not who you were, Alira. They won't care. I was a war widow who kept fighting after the surrender. They branded me a militant, a separatist, and a thief. To them, I'm an open warrant. Harlan crossed to her. You're my wife. The children are under Alliance protection now. You're not alone anymore. That never stopped them before. She didn't cry. She didn't raise her voice. But she leaned into him like a warrior forced to admit exhaustion. Later that night, as the children slept, she pulled a weathered data crystal from beneath the bed frame. It glowed faintly blue in her palm. What is that? Harlan asked. A contingency, she said. Proof, documents, recordings, memories of what really happened. It won't clear my name, but it might convince the right people that I'm not a threat anymore. He studied it. Why haven't you used it? Because I didn't have anything to lose before. Now? She looked toward the adjoining room, where the children lay asleep beneath woven blankets. Now I do. Harlan sat beside her and took the crystal gently from her hand. Then we'll use it. Carefully. Together. She didn't reply. But when he rose to lock the doors that night, she followed him, crawling into bed beside him, like it was the only place she truly trusted the world to leave her alone. And in the hours before dawn, when the world turned silver and cold again, he held her through every tremble that memory dragged from her bones. The transmission had reached them sooner than expected. A Virexian scout ship landed 2 ridgelines away at midday. It made no sound beyond the low-frequency hum that resonated through the valley like a tuning fork pressed against the earth. Harlan saw it from the lookout deck, sleek, dark, and unmistakably hostile in shape. Alira was already armed when he came down. You planned this, he said. Didn't you? I planned for this, she corrected. There's a difference. The children had been packed into the crawl shelter below the station. Dax monitored their vitals and was programmed to alert Harlan of any breach. He had double-locked the exterior bulkheads, sealed the medbay, and encrypted their solar feeds. But it wouldn't be enough if the patrol came armed. Harlan wasn't a soldier. But he had trained beside enough during his years with the Humanitarian Corps to know what field warfare looked like. He donned a light body shield, loaded a concussive injector, and followed Alira into the deep snow. She moved with her brace like it was part of her. The war had never truly left her muscles. Her eyes scanned the trees with silent precision. Her breath didn't hitch once. He watched her, and it broke his heart. You don't have to fight this time, he said quietly, her jaw clenched. Then who will? I will. She turned. You're a medic. I'm your husband. For a long second, she said nothing. Then she touched his cheek, and in that touch was both apology and devotion. The patrol found them before they could reach the far ridge. There were 3 soldiers, 2 Virexian, 1 human, likely contracted. They moved in formation, weapons low but ready. The lead officer recognized her the moment he saw her. Designation Alira Vathen. You are subject to detainment under Treaty Code 41. She stood tall. I am a citizen of this sector. I have not violated any law. My residence is registered. My family is protected under Alliance Article 12. You forfeited protection when you left the treaty zones. I didn't leave. I was left behind. The officer didn't blink. Surrender now and your children will not be harmed. That's when Harlan stepped forward. You say another word about her children, he said calmly, and I will drop you before your mouth finishes the next syllable. The soldiers shifted, surprised. The officer studied him. And you are? Harlan Frost. Her husband. Her doctor. And someone who knows how many bones are in your wrist. He raised his injector. Want to guess how many I can break with one shot? Alira's eyes flicked toward him. For the first time in hours, she smiled. It wasn't a long fight, because there was no fight. The officer calculated the risk, saw the conviction in their stance, the refusal to yield. And he hesitated. That was enough. Alira tossed the data crystal at his feet. There's proof of who I was and why I'm not that person anymore. He picked it up, frowned. This won't erase your name. No, she said, but maybe it'll keep you from giving my daughter one like it. They left without firing a shot. Back at the outpost, when the children emerged from hiding, Alira took them into her arms and held them for so long that Mira fell asleep with her face pressed into her mother's neck. Later, when the stars returned and the heat from the fire warmed the floors, Alira sat beside Harlan and whispered, "I didn't think I'd ever get to protect them with something other than a weapon." Harlan turned to her and said, "You didn't protect them with a weapon today." She nodded, eyes damp. "I protected them with you." And in that moment, no patrol, no exile, no name from the past had power over them. They had chosen each other, and that choice had made them strong. The snow had long since surrendered to thawing sunlight, but the scars it left behind told stories that no season could erase. The valley that once trapped them in white silence now pulsed with color. Mosses, early blossoms, and timid wildlife testing the borders of rebirth. The air held warmth during the day, and when the wind stirred, it carried a scent that almost felt like forgiveness. Harlan stood on the outer platform, the morning sun kissing the horizon as he calibrated the new comm array. The upgraded system, recently delivered by a long-delayed Alliance transport, hummed with fresh purpose. It wasn't just a medic's outpost anymore. It was becoming a home. A registered, reinforced civilian homestead. Legal. Connected. Protected. Inside, Alira moved through the outpost without her stabilizer. She no longer needed it for short distances. Her legs still tired easily, and the pain reminded her of everything that had been taken, but it also reminded her of everything she had reclaimed. She found Mira at the table, drawing sketches of the local birds with bright mineral pens, while Talon sat beside her, reading a manual on atmospheric filtration systems with his brow furrowed in deep concentration. There was something almost absurdly beautiful about the normalcy of it, as if the war-torn pieces of their past had never been real. But they had been, and that made the peace more precious. Alira stood there watching them until she felt a familiar presence at her back. Harlan's arms circled her waist, and she leaned into him, sighing without words. "You were up early," she said. "Wanted to check the signal range. We're fully synced now with the Alliance registry. I filed the codes under my name." She turned slightly to look up at him. "Yours?" He nodded. "Frost, technically, but I included you and the kids under the amended family clause. If any patrols come through again, they'll see what we are, not fugitives, not patients, just us." She let her head rest against his chest. "I didn't think peace would feel like this." "Like what?" "Like I don't have to look over my shoulder every 5 seconds. Her voice caught. "Like I can exhale." He kissed her temple. "You've earned that breath 100 times over." Later, the 4 of them shared a meal beneath the open canopy Harlan had rigged with thermal supports. Mira climbed onto his lap and demanded he recite the same old Earth poem he had read the night of their first warm spring. Talon corrected every second line with his own rewordings, laughing too hard to finish half of them. Alira watched it all unfold with quiet, burning joy. That night, as they stood outside gazing at the stars, Harlan pointed toward a flickering dot on the horizon. "That one," he said. "That's Earth, the old homeworld. It's still out there." Alira squinted. "Do you ever want to go back?" He considered it, then shook his head. "I think I already have. I just didn't know my home wasn't a place." She took his hand. Her voice was small but certain. "Neither did I." The stars shimmered in silence, and for the first time in years, they were not witnesses to war or loss, but to belonging. The seasons turned with patience, and where once a single outpost stood against a frozen grave, there now lay a blooming homestead surrounded by life and love and memory. Harlan installed solar reflectors on the eastern cliff to ensure light reached the garden beds year-round. Alira taught Mira and Talon how to use hunting drones, not for war but to provide, to protect. The children grew fast. Taller, louder, smarter. The past never left, but it no longer ruled them. Sometimes Alira would sit with Harlan in the evenings and talk about the war. Not in bitterness, but in acknowledgement. Naming the wounds helped heal them. Sometimes Harlan would speak of the comrades he'd lost. He never spoke of his years in isolation before her, but she could see the quiet grief in his eyes when he did, and in the way he always touched her shoulder, as if to make sure she was real. Their marriage deepened not through grand events, but through 1,000 small gestures. In the way she waited for him at the end of every long day, in the way he still insisted on checking her vitals every week, even when she rolled her eyes. In how Talon started calling him Dad one evening over dinner, unprompted, and neither of them mentioned it after, but both knew it meant everything. Then, one morning, something changed. Alira stepped out of bed and walked to the sink without her brace. No cane, no assistance. Her gait was slow, awkward, imperfect, but it was hers. Harlan, half asleep on the couch with Mira nestled beside him, sat bolt upright when he saw her. She didn't smile. She didn't weep. She simply looked at him and whispered, "I'm still here." He stood and crossed the room in 3 steps, wrapping her in his arms. "That's all I'll ever need," he murmured against her hair. And it was true. Their life wasn't grand. It wasn't the kind that made history records or sang through the stars. But it was real, built from the ruins of loss, forged in frost and fire, rooted in promises made not with fanfare, but with hands held through pain. A crippled widow who found new strength, a lone medic who found a reason to stay, and 2 children who finally learned what safety felt like. The universe didn't pause to notice them. But on that ridge, beneath the stars, a family stood, and the light, quiet, soft, stubborn, never left.